Welcome to This Just In, the show bringing you the latest advancements in healthcare, strategy, innovation, and public policy. And now, for the fastest voice in healthcare, here's your host, Justin Barnes.
Thank you for tuning in, and welcome to This Just In. I'm your host, Justin Barnes. In these segments, I'll bring you the latest advancements in healthcare, strategy, innovation, and public policy. As always, we're broadcasting from the This Just In studios on the Business Radio X network, as well as the HealthcareNOW Radio network. For this episode, my 180th episode, we have a great guest, David Henka, CEO of ActiveRADAR, that's working hard to lower healthcare costs for millions of Americans. Welcome to the show, David.
Thanks, Justin. Happy to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. When I first heard about this opportunity from your team, I got very excited. I think you and I have parallel paths in some ways, or at least parallel thoughts, or at least intentions of working hard to find solutions for Americans and just the spiraling healthcare, escalating healthcare costs. They're spiraling out of control. So doing whatever we can to rein them in. But I look forward to diving in, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you.
So just to get a little background, you and I have not had the pleasure of meeting in person, but where did you grow up and attend school and all that good stuff? Background.
Yeah, I'm a native of Southern California. I grew up in the beach communities in Southern California as a surfer kid, actually, and I went to school at UCLA where I obtained my bachelor's degree, and I quickly kind of transitioned into working into the healthcare space at that time. And I've been in the healthcare industry, in a variety of healthcare industries for the last several decades, expanding from health plan, from pharmaceuticals, from benefits consulting, and also where I'm at right now at ActiveRADAR.
Excellent. So, tell me a little bit about. First of all, where did the name ActiveRADAR come from, and then follow on just to say a little bit more about the business, because I have not heard that name, but would love to learn more. What was the space you're in?
Right. So, ActiveRADAR is an analytic and technology company that specializes in specifically the pharmaceutical benefit space, and we didn't want to have RX in our name. We didn't want to either showcase ourselves as a PBM, which we're not. We wanted to be able to identify ourselves as a unique, separate entity that works in collaborations with PBMs, but is able to do so with a set of analytic and data tools that are not available to the average consumer. So the idea for ActiveRADAR is that we're able to analyze, detect, and reduce your pharmacy spend by over 20%. And so the idea is to kind of position ourselves as a disruptor within the market that can kind of see beyond the horizon in terms of what the spend is for a particular health plan purchaser or plan sponsor.
Excellent. So specifically, I mean, who would you be your average customer, or who are a few of your customers or average customers?
So our average customer is a self-funded health plan, TPA, plan sponsor, employer, Taft-Hartley Labor and Trust Group with more than 10,000 lives, that has a pharmacy benefit manager relationship that they're trying to help control the spend for their pharmacy claims, and that's our ideal target customer, self-funded, greater than 10,000 lives.
How many of those are out there in America right now? Ballpark, do you know?
Thousands.
Okay.
Thousands. If you think of the public sector, if you think of school districts, if you think of cities, counties, states, trust funds, TPAs, health plans, large Fortune 100 employers, all of these are, potential customers of ours.
Excellent. Perfect. So now diving into some of the nitty-gritty stuff, which I love and certainly want to learn from and learn from your expertise, what are some of the methods that payers and plan sponsors can turn to proactively reduce their pharmaceutical spend?
So the traditional way that people have done this is by restricting the benefit, by trying to, grab it by the throat and choke it down a little bit. And in doing so by either raising cost sharing, raising co-payments or co-pays. And the other way is to put in different program elements to help, reduce the cost, like step therapy is a particular one where you have to start off at drug A before you can go to drug B. And the third way is to restrict the number of drugs that are available on the formulary. And all three of these things really don't do anything to address the core root of what's driving the cost. It really is trying to mitigate the cost increase. And they're really just, in my opinion, very much stopgap measures. They're important factors to consider, but they really don't address the issue of cost in the program.
So what are some of the ways that, what are 2 or 3 things that do work, in your opinion?
Well, it's a difficult, so it's complex first, Justin. You got to understand that anything you do here has an impact over there. There's the yin and the yang of everything that happens. And one of the really shiny objects in this space happens to be the cost of specialty medications. 2 or 3 prescriptions can drive, 50% of your pharmacy spend in 1 year. But these drugs sometimes are considered, critically necessary because they're treating a condition in which there may be no treatment, or the treatment options are very, very limited. And so that's driving a great deal of the cost and getting a lot of attention of employers and consultants across the country. Our plan, our program, our platform looks at the 50% of the other drugs that are prescribed, the non-specialty drugs. Mm-hmm. The drugs are most frequently prescribed for hypertension, cholesterol, diabetes, and understanding that there's a tremendous price variation in the cost of these medications to treat the most common illnesses in the United States, if you think about it. So there's many drugs that could treat cholesterol. There's many drugs that could treat hypertension and diabetes, and there's also a wide variety of pricing for these drugs. So that's where we focus in on.
Excellent. And so and that's obviously where your analytics tools come in. And how do you select those drugs, or how does that work? What's the science there? A little bit of it.
Yeah, so again, we have a whole team of clinical pharmacists, medical director, and physicians who evaluate drugs in 65 different therapeutic categories, the most commonly prescribed drugs by primary care physicians in the United States. And many of these drugs are generics. Many of these drugs have been available for decades. They're the most widely prescribed, most widely studied drugs in the market. So if you take the drug category of statins for cholesterol, there's at least a half a dozen drugs used to treat cholesterol. And what we're able to do is to identify the lowest cost drug within that therapeutic category that has the same therapeutic equivalence as any other drug at the dose appropriate level. And we make that drug the benchmark. It's the lowest price drug, and so that's the benchmark for reimbursement by the plan. And so a member has the choice of asking their doctor if they could go to the lowest cost drug, or it's their voluntary choice to pay the difference between the drug that was prescribed. So it's really a way of providing transparency to the marketplace, providing transparency to the provider, to the member, and not limiting their choice of what they are able to take or be prescribed, but actually giving them information about how much these drugs cost, and provide them the tools and the information to make an informed decision.
I love it. It's excellent. So, and this can go along the lines of consumer as well, but I have a lot of consumers that listen to the show, a lot of business people as well, and the business side, but consumers. I love consumer strategies to help people lower their healthcare costs. So what are some of the thoughts, just as a general consumer, that you would like to share or could share for the average American to lower their healthcare costs, or specifically around pharmaceuticals and drugs and prescriptions and so forth?
Yeah, it's a great topic, and this is where transparency in the marketplace is really, I think, going to be shining a light, because in many medical procedures, and including pharmaceuticals, let's use MRIs as an example. Mm-hmm. If you need a non-urgent MRI for your back or for your knee or some such thing, yep, you could have that MRI done in a hospital setting at a hospital-based MRI, and it could cost $5,000.
Right.
Or you could go to a standalone MRI facility and have the same quality image produced for about $800. Now, if you're paying out of pocket for it and you're getting the same picture and you're paying, $4,200 difference, you're going to make an informed decision perhaps to use this standalone facility. And the thing is, there are tools available to help you identify that, but they're not really readily available, or the average consumer doesn't know about it. The same thing's true with pharmaceuticals. If you're diagnosed with a chronic medical condition, and it could be, asthma, allergies, hypertension, et cetera, something you're going to be taking medication for on a frequent basis, it's good to have that discussion with your prescriber, with your provider, on what the drug therapy options are. And then there are also tools available on the internet that'll help you identify which pharmacy will sell you that medication at the lowest net cost. And there's certain pharmacies that are known for passing along cost savings for these commonly prescribed medications. Again, it takes a little investigation. It takes a little bit of elbow grease, so to speak, but there are ways to do it. But it's not as transparent as I think I would like to see the marketplace be.
Oh, I completely agree. I mean, to even your MRI example, the health plan that I chair here in Georgia, we've done a lot of that work. I mean, I think there's over 7,000 procedures that we've gone off and gotten. Basically, we call it true cost pricing, but that bottom line pricing from all these different specialists. I think over 280 specialists at this point, dozens and dozens of different centers, because I can get that MRI for $295 or $395. Or you can go into a hospital and get it, like you said, $3,000 or $5,000. Or you can go to the exact same image, same trained specialists. We'll read your results for $295 or $350 or $395, depending on where you want to go and where you want to drive to. But again, not usually within a couple of miles. And the same thing on the even like I said on the procedure side. So I'm a very large proponent of transparency, and then also I've done a lot of this research myself, even outside of the plan, for drug prices. I mean, I go to Costco for probably 95%. I'm not pitching Costco for any other reasons. That's what I've done on my research. And for the medications that I've taken, and sometimes I take, even an irregular basis, they have the best prices. And I recommend all consumers do that type of research. And because it might be CVS, it might be Walgreens, it might be Costco, it might be whomever it is. But Walmart's doing a great job. There's a lot of online pharmacies as well. But just do that. I think. There's a great article last week that I read or quote. It talks about how much time we spend researching our car, researching our house, researching our vacations, but we don't do that same amount of research, even 10th degree for our healthcare and our healthcare costs. What do you think about that?
I think it's true, and I think that there's some notions and conceptions that many consumers have that their doctor prescribes something and there can't be anything else different available. But the interesting thing in my experience is that doctors know very little about the price of procedures or medications that they're prescribing. They're there as clinicians, as diagnosticians, and trying to find out what's wrong with you. And they're not typically concerned with the cost of the treatment or the cost of the procedure. And so it's as much as an education opportunity for the providers or for the prescribers as it is for the consumers.
I completely agree. And actually, do you ever heard of a gentleman, Clark Howard, who has a consumer radio show? You heard of Clark?
No, tell me more.
Okay. Well, no, he's got a show. It's a nationally syndicated radio show. He's on TV as well. But he's really an advocate for consumers across the board, healthcare, but everything. It's just all about how to buy things smartly. He happens to be my neighbor, and he happened to be at Costco when I was there last. And sometimes people are different on TV or than they are in the real person. He was actually more of a deal maker. So he actually was asking the price of all 3 prescriptions that he was getting to make sure he's getting the very best price. And then he had alternatives. He had done the research. And I was learning so much just listening to him. I didn't say a word to him. I was just listening to him because, it's just kind of funny how some people are on TV, they have a personality, but then when you see them in person, they're not the exact same. They just play that role on TV. He was a consumer times 10. He was so good on his purchasing habit at Costco. So anyhow, it was just kind of cool. I don't know if you, but he's a national speaker on how to be a good consumer in every corner of your life. So.
And I think that's something that we need to embrace in the healthcare space as well.
Yeah. So talking about drug pricing reforms, there's been some recent proposals, and I'd love to get your thoughts on international benchmarking because it's been in the news a lot. What are your thoughts there? So,
again, it's a complicated subject, and the devil gets sometimes lost in the details. And there's many examples of what is being referred to as international benchmarking. And some countries do it very well, and other countries' systems would not adopt well into the United States. So, the idea is that there is a governmental agency that regulates the price of drugs that pharmaceutical manufacturers can make available to and sell in the United States. And that's kind of the the top line concept of what benchmarking is. There is some sort of governmental control, and I think fundamentally that does go in the face of a lot of our economic drivers in the United States on having government control the price of something, and it also may fundamentally disrupt the pharmaceutical industry in terms of not only their production, manufacturing, and research, but also the other liabilities that they face when they're dealing with lawsuits and things like that. So, I think on the surface, the idea is that, we should be able to get as good of a price as another country does for these medications. But again, what are the economic ramifications for our current marketplace in the United States to overhaul that marketplace with an extraordinarily strong lobbying group within the pharmaceutical manufacturers industry? I think it's a good talking point, and maybe something else will come of it. But on the surface, it's probably not a really viable solution for our current economic environment.
That's very fair, and I had not thought of that perspective, because I do know there are strategies of bringing in certain medications from Canada. The same exact drug is just in Canada, it happens to be 7 times cheaper or 8 times cheaper or something like that. Not every drug is different. It's not a universal. But what do you say to that? If it's the same, do you think it's kind of cheating the system, or that's a very fair strategy that some people are certainly doing successfully, or what are your thoughts there?
Well, in my view, as a plan sponsor, and I was a plan sponsor managing a national trust fund for a number of years, there's certain liabilities that you have to accept if you went with a program like that, or international drug purchasing or international medical tourism. And in my view, the liability is not worth the risk. The potential risk, and even though it is a very, very small potential risk of drug fraud or counterfeit drug, sure, or just the shipment of medications across international lines, there's a lot of other factors that need to be considered into this on not just as an individual purchaser level, if you're going over into Toronto and buying your asthma medication and coming back, but if you're actually wholesale importing medications from a different country, there's other factors I think that need to be placed under consideration to really understand if this is a viable large-scale operation. I don't think it really is.
Right. Yeah, I'd have to agree. I think I know people who do it on an individual basis, but to your point, very safe channels to purchase. So you kind of fight out, you can root out the fraud for sure. However, I agree on a grand scale, at mass scale, for millions and millions and millions of Americans, that that could be certainly different. So in May, HHS proposed a requirement for pharmaceutical companies to include list prices in their TV ads. And if enacted, do you think this will do much, or what are your thoughts around that? Certainly interesting.
Well, yeah, it is interesting, and if you think about it too, there are a couple lawsuits that are pending on this, that it's infringing on the manufacturer's First Amendment rights to free speech, and that actually has a viable chance of just knocking down that whole the whole process on drug pricing. But I think the way the current legislation is written is, any drug that costs more than $35, the list price has to be on the screen. But what list price are they going to use? In the pharmaceutical world, there's probably 4 or 5 different list prices that are considered standard, whether it be the maximum allowable cost, whether it be the average wholesale price, and what does that cost mean to an individual member who may be a school teacher and might have a $20 copayment for prescription drugs. Really means nothing in context to many consumers, most consumers, because they're not paying that price. They're paying a fixed copayment or percentage of the copayment, or a copayment up to their deductible. And having an individual drug listed, and it's probably going to be an expensive drug for probably a serious medical condition, doesn't have a lot of context. And I think Alex Azar said during this discussion that he wanted to do this to, quote, shame the pharmaceutical manufacturers into showing what their prices are. And I don't know if you're able to shame a pharmaceutical manufacturer But I think, part of that intent was to have them actually put on the screen what their prices are in an effort to make them a little bit more sensitive to that fact. I don't think it's a strategy that has a lot of merit, and I don't believe. I think a better strategy would just go back to the 1987 and eliminate pharmaceutical advertising of all sort. That might be a better way to address this problem.
Actually, that's my follow-up questions. What recommendation would you make if you had the president's ear and the administration's ear? What would you tell? What were two silver bullets you think, or not silver bullets, but two strategies that could work? What would you put forth?
Yeah, a couple things. So in lieu of a complete overhaul of our entire medical and pharmaceutical system, there is a tremendous amount of inefficiency and cost overruns that occur in the system. But we do have this wonderful economic system of capitalism, which really does reward, organizations that thrive in a competitive environment. Right now, there's very little competition in the pharmaceutical space. There's patent extensions, there's patent extenders, there's manufacturing tricks that are able to, guarantee that individual manufacturer has sole domain over a molecule or a chemical entity for years and years and years. I mean, it's really a license to make money. And so looking at ways to encourage the development of new and innovative drugs, but at the same time limiting the monopolies that are seen for many of these drugs is one way to kind of address the economic aspect of both pharma manufacturing and our own economic system. The other way to do so is make pricing more transparent and reimbursing at the lowest cost drug or a series of lower cost drugs, but that's the maximum that a insurance company or plan sponsor will pay. So if you're taking drugs for diabetes, asthma, hypertension, and there are 30 drugs on the market in each of those categories to treat your condition, find the lowest cost drug that will treat your condition effectively and reimburse for that. That is your coach ticket on the airplane. If you want to bump up to first class, you're welcome to do so, but you have to do so at your own expense. And having more and more of this transparency available in the marketplace will not only allow consumers to make good choices, but also plan sponsors and employers to understand that there are a great degree of price variation in this marketplace, just like the imaging marketplace, and make it more transparent. And I believe the market will respond to that.
It's excellent. It makes me think of reference-based pricing, in how we, pay 130% of Medicare, 180%, 170%, 220, whatever it is, but it's reference-based pricing on the procedure side.
Correct.
Excellent. So we got about 3 or 4 minutes left, real quick, kind of lightning round for a couple questions. What are your thoughts on generics? I mean, can they really curb our costs, or what are your thoughts there?
Great question. Right now, most plan sponsors, most employers are prescribing anywhere between 80 and 88% generic drugs in their plan. Most plans have a mandatory generic dispensing program, and almost every consultant or employer that I speak to thinks that they can't do much better than that in terms of their generic dispensing rate. And they're right. They can't really prescribe any more generics. The problem is there's no pricing regulation on generics either in our current system. And so even though they are prescribing a lot of generics, generic prices are going up through the roof in a lot of different categories. Diabetes, antidepressants, are drugs for arthritis, commonly used drugs. In our program, in our analytic profile, about 45% of the drugs that we recommend switching are from a high-cost generic to a low-cost generic alternative, and we see this as a huge opportunity in the marketplace to identify lower-cost generic drugs that are already available in the formulary in the market that can save an individual, either consumer or a plan sponsor, 20% of their pharmacy spend. It's an amazing opportunity.
That's excellent. Very cool. Well, I have one final question. I always like to ask this of my guests in our closing segment. What is your favorite place to get or be inspired?
Well, I mentioned that I grew up in the beach communities in Southern California, and I'm still completely awed and inspired by the ocean, and anything to do with the ocean above or below it, whether it be scuba diving or surfing or just hanging out with my family. That's where I not only recharge my batteries, but that's where I gain the opportunity, and that's where I have those aha moments and thoughts of clarity that occur very rarely. But that's where I find my inspiration.
Yeah, it's the water is certainly one of mine, and I couldn't agree more. David, it was great to have you on the show, and thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us.
Great. Thank you, Justin.
You got it. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. And please tune in weekdays at 2:30 p.m. Eastern, 11:30 a.m. Pacific to hear our latest shows. As always, you can track me on Twitter at HITadvisor and use the hashtag ThisJustinRadio so we can respond to your comments from the show. If you miss any of this episode or want to hear more, all my shows are posted on Apple iTunes, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, Google Play, and TuneIn. Also, you can check out the new website they've launched at justinbarnes.com. Thanks, everyone. Have a terrific week.